I got an email this morning, and the subject is, does Trump support mandatory military service? There's this idea that was published in the Washington Post that suggested that Trump wanted some kind of national service, join the military thing in his first term, and that he'll do that in his second term. The Trump campaign said, no, they're just trying to slam our campaign. But whether Trump supports mandatory military service or not, the idea of conscription, if not for the military, for national service, is actually gaining steam from other folks in the U.S. and the U.K., and this is a concerning trend. This is actually one of the reasons why I'm politically homeless and didn't fit in the United States, because I think you have a certain number of conservatives where I might agree with economically, who are like, yeah, the country's great, we should love our country, everyone should go and join the military. And they think that the state should own you. I'm not saying every conservative, but it is concerning to see proposals in a number of countries from the conservative parties saying, yeah, if you're born here, if you're our citizen, then you're just going to do what we want. You don't have freedom of choice. You've seen a very small handful of countries moving that direction, smaller countries mostly in recent years. But to me, it's more concerning in the West for the very simple reason that in the West, rules are rules. I was recently in Cairo, Egypt. I was talking to some attorneys and some other friends of mine about the conscription that they have in Egypt. And they talked about how if you get dual citizenship, you don't have to do it. And so that's why we've worked with Egyptians before who wanted to get second passports. If you look at Turkey, where I occasionally spend time, there's a system of just you pay and you don't have to join. A similar system exists in Armenia. It's $5,000 or $6,000. You may not say that it's fair, but okay, hey, if I can save up $5,000 or $6,000 for my son not to join the army, then that's cool. And of course, there's other places where you just bribe your way out. Not something that I'm really comfortable with coming from Cleveland, Ohio. We like to keep things legal here. But in my mind, if the U.S. or the U.K. imposed some of the conscription that politicians are talking about, it would just be a matter of you have to go. There's not going to be certainly a bribe to pay. There won't be a fee to pay because those countries are more egalitarian. And I'm not convinced that dual citizenship would matter because, I mean, just look at the U.S. policy on how taxes. I mean, you can be a dual citizen, American, living overseas in that other country, and you still owe the U.S. taxes, or at least to file a return. So that's why I think that when this kind of stuff happens in the West, it should be more concerning. And it's also why I think that sticking around in a country that's heading in the wrong direction and thinking that the conservatives are going to save it, yeah, they may save some things, but they may add along with it some kind of, rah military service. Here's the article that spawned this. In Trump's orbit, some news about mandatory military service, conscription. This is indeed from the Washington Post. It tells the story about a young high school student in Texarkana, Texas, who was a senior and kind of got roped into a military aptitude test given by military recruiters. And he goes on to talk about this guy who ran the Pentagon in the latter part of Trump's first term and how he basically wanted high school students to all have to take this military service test, this military qualifying test to graduate high school. And that was kind of the precursor to what they wanted as a national service mandate and other measures to remedy what they see as a crisis, quote unquote, facing the all-volunteer military. Trump had been complimentary of this gentleman's performance during his administration and suggested that if there's a second term, he might reprise his role as defense secretary, which of course would then control the Pentagon. And so that's where this came from. The gentleman they mentioned, Christopher Miller, said that national service should be strongly considered. He described the concept as a common rite of passage, one that would create a sense of, quote-unquote, shared sacrifice among America's youth, saying that it reinforces the bonds of stability. Why wouldn't we give that a try? And so, again, the plan would be to use this mandatory military test to kind of figure out, I guess, who the people who should go into it. It is a little bit unclear, unfortunately, but you have people who Trump was complimentary of who were saying, let's have military service. Why wouldn't we give it a try to make it a common rite of passage to support your country? This is the country that you pay a lot of money in taxes to that can't give you really much of anything in terms of the way of services. You pay as much as European countries. You don't get free health care. I'm not saying you should get free health care, but how about lower taxes and no free health care? No, you pay higher taxes and you get nothing. They can't even keep the roads paved. Roads and bridges in the U.S. are in a shambles. The airports are in a shambles. All things Trump said himself. The country is not well. And I fear that politically that could allow some maneuvering by people who say, yeah, let's distract attention from where the country's at by getting people on board by patriotic means, because people don't want to join the military anymore. People just don't want to do it. And so let's force them. And that to me is pretty dangerous because, look at what the U.S. does, again, from a taxation policy. No matter where you live, even if you never spend a single day in the U.S., you at the very least have to file a U.S. tax return. Now, we help our clients who are, among other nationalities, some of them are Americans. We help them legally reduce their taxes. Americans can't do so as aggressively as other countries, but you can still reduce your taxes by a lot by moving overseas. But you can never escape it. Do we really think the U.S. conscription policy would be any different? I mean, you can say, in the Vietnam War, people went to certain places. Society is much more connected these days. It's easier to go and grab people. I really think that if you look at the culture, if you look at the fabric of how the U.S. operates, if you're a U.S. citizen and something like this kind of mandatory service comes in, your kids are going to be forced to go and do mandatory service. There's just no way around it. And, look at what they do if you don't pay your taxes. They shut off your passport. You don't think they'd do that this way? How are you going to stay overseas if they can shut off your passport? So they're so much further ahead than since the Vietnam War in terms of finding people. They have new mechanisms, again, for tax collection. They have new mechanisms to shut off your passport. And hey, if you're living in a country, even if you get a residence permit somewhere else and they turn off your passport, well, once you no longer have a valid passport, you're going to be deported. This is just yet another reason you want to have a second passport. Again, I doubt that the U.S. would say having a second passport is an exemption from military service, but you could make the decision, I don't want to be an American. And so that's not the kind of thing I would want to wait for. That's the kind of thing I'd want to plan ahead. So if you have ancestry, for example, if you have parents or grandparents or great-grandparents, I would start checking that family tree. We help people at Nomad Capitalist get citizenship by descent. Those are some of the best passports that you can get from the terms of where can you work, where can you study, how can you travel. If you can get a European passport, that would be a good thing for your kids to have in case mandatory military service comes into play by some patriotic guy who thinks you owe the government. They owe you nothing, by the way. Just keep in mind, they owe you nothing. They take all your tax dollars. They're not giving you anything. You're getting nothing. But they think that you owe them, that your children owe them. I would get working at a citizenship by descent if I qualified, because it could take as many as 2, 3, 4 years for your kids to get that passport in their hand. And then I would go and spend some time in that country, and I would get comfortable being there, take a summer vacation there. Quite frankly, if people were to renounce their U.S. citizenship or any other citizenship because they don't want to join the military and potentially get their head shot off, I think there's nothing wrong with that at all. I think there's entirely something wrong with a country that takes, and does not give doing it. Listen, if Liechtenstein or Monaco wanted to have mandatory military service, from my brief time in those places, all right, fine. It's a much smaller place, much more sense of camaraderie. The government's much more responsive. That's not how big countries work. I would want to have a second passport. If you are a wealthy family, Malta in the European Union has citizenship essentially by investment. You can donate around $1 million and get passports for the family. The Caribbean, the prices are going up, but prices are $200,000 and up for citizenship in a matter of months. There's numerous different ways to get second passports. We've covered that for years, but I would want to have a second passport. If I'm not in the U.S., maybe dual citizenship is an exemption if I'm living outside of the country. If I'm American, it might come down to, do I want to be an American? And quite frankly, I wouldn't judge you if you decided not to be for that reason. But it's not just the U.S. The United Kingdom's Rishi Sunak, who's going to go down in the polls like a dog in the very near future. The Tories are going to get their butts kicked. Is this a suicide mission or something? The UK's Sunak eyes national service. A proposed national service scheme is not the same as conscription, and it is not as aggressive as some of the other proposals, but it gives youth an option between mandatory military and civil service. Rishi Sunak has pledged to bring back mandatory national service. I believe the UK got rid of it in 1963. But if the governing Conservative Party wins the July 4th national election, which there's a 0% chance of that happening, he has prompted a nationwide debate on a policy that Britain abandoned more than 60 years ago. According to an announcement made by Sunak, 18-year-olds will be given a choice between a full-time placement in the armed forces or volunteering in their community. I think I'll choose to volunteer in the community. Thank you. The conservative leader who's hoping to boost his party's popularity as it lags behind. Just playing the Tucker laugh. As it lags behind the opposition Labor Party by a wide margin in the opinion polls, said the scheme would promote a sense, it's the same thing, it's the same playbook these guys all use, would promote a shared sense of purpose among our young people and a renewed sense of pride in our country. Listen, if there's no pride in your country, maybe the first thing you should check is, should there be any pride? Maybe people are no longer proud because they shouldn't be, because you and your like did a bad job. Instead of blaming the victim, why not blame the perpetrator? Why not go after the people who created the problem? I get it. When it comes to economic issues, it's always those greedy, nasty capitalists. Never the government who mismanage everything. Never everybody who mismanages the monetary policy. It's never their fault. It's greedy capitalists. When it comes to social issues, we have to be patriotic. Why? Listen, why are fewer people signing up for the military? Why are fewer people, signing up to do anything to support your country? You haven't given them a reason. So here's what happens. What have I been telling you for years? When the countries that have been, high in the hog, that have had all the success to themselves, when the countries that we talk about, that I live in, when they were like, backwaters, when Malaysia, who would go to Malaysia, right? When the U.S. and the U.K. and a handful of other countries had all the gravy to themselves. Yeah, join the military, don't join the military, who cares? Now, people realize they have options. What happens? The country goes downhill. People are increasingly feel trapped. Inflation is trapping people. Just people. The deal is over. People are no longer getting from their country what they used to get. They've been exposed, these countries. The legacy brand Western countries have been exposed. And in response, people are like, yeah, I'm not so patriotic. Gen Z, for all the good and bad, is the least patriotic generation in a century. And you can say, oh, they're entitled brats, and maybe on some things they are. But maybe they haven't seen a reason to support a country that it's being exposed does nothing for you. I mean, bloody hell, in the pandemic, you couldn't even go to your country if you were Australian. But I bet if they imposed this kind of service, I bet they'd find a way to get you and put you on the front lines. You really think that they wouldn't? You think these politicians care about you? Of course they don't. So opposition parties in the UK have criticized the scheme, saying its consequences for the economy and society are unclear. But now you have the playbook. They've come out and said, shared sense of purpose, renewed sense of pride in our country. Listen, you don't have to be proud. They haven't done their job. You paid the bill. You paid and paid and paid. Maybe your kids didn't pay, but you paid and paid. You paid them 40 cents on the dollar, the pound, the euro that you earned. You went out and worked hard. And now you realize you could make that money anywhere. I've earned the vast, vast, vast majority of the money that I have outside of the United States since I left. It's possible now. You didn't have to live in their country to make the wealth, and you certainly have to give them the 40 cents or more. And then when people finally start to push back, your kids have to go to the front lines to fix the problem that they created. And I think that this shows you, as we've been talking about, we often talk about it economically. We talk about how the sanctions are backfired. We talk about all the different things where they're losing power. They're losing power in the hearts and minds of their own people, so now they're going to force you to do something you don't want to do. Now, the Conservative Party has a 0.0% chance of winning anything this year, so that's not going to happen. But it's out there. I normally say it about left-wing economic proposals. Hey, you float a wealth tax, eventually it gets in people's minds, and then the more desperate people become, yeah, that wealth tax that they were talking about for 10 years, that sounds pretty good. Eventually it gets in. Does this eventually get in as well? Listen, again, just voting for some right-wing party is not going to solve all your problems. Maybe they cut your taxes a little bit, which you could get by moving to dozens of other countries and cutting them by a lot. But yeah, they're also going to send your son to die because we need to renew the sense of pride in our country. So let's not exaggerate the UK program. Again, it's no one proposing it's getting into power. But there is a serve your community kind of thing. And listen, you should say that's nice. But it's like, how nice is it if you're forced to do it? And why is the government taking so much of your money and not doing that stuff itself? What, you need to go around and paint people's fences and plant their gardens? How about the government does that with all the money they take from you? This is upsetting. I think that having a second citizenship is important. I've talked about, if your kids are going to university, look at options outside of your country. Find opportunities to get your family to be more international. This is not an angle we've thought about much in the past, but we have people telling us, hey, there may be other European countries eyeing this in the response to, well, Russia, Ukraine, let's build up our military. If people don't want to join, we'll force them. I don't know which country might do this first, but it's being talked about in a part of the world where it hasn't really been talked about for decades. I would want my kids to have a second passport. I would want to have them be comfortable with somewhere else to live. As I always say, once you're talking about passports, you can look at all the other things that we talk about here. If you want to learn about getting a second passport to protect yourself from this and any number of ills, you can go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We help clients get second passports, sometimes multiple second passports. You may already be entitled to one through your ancestry for free. But again, it takes time to get a second passport. Don't be the person calling saying they're shipping me off to the front lines tomorrow. Well, it's too late. You're going to need 6, 12, 24 months or even more to get a passport. It's something I'd be looking at now. There's multiple other benefits for it. Obviously, your kids, if they get a European passport, they could go and live and work and study in the EU. That's obviously more beneficial if you're from the US or the UK, where you can't do that now. But maybe a Caribbean passport works. Maybe there's some other passport you're entitled to. Maybe there's, who knows? We've helped people get dozens of different countries' passports. Go to nomadcapitalist.com/apply. We'd be happy to help you. But this to me is concerning because nothing bothers me more than watching a government that does nothing but take from you. They don't know who you are. They don't care who you are. You're just a number to them. That applies just as much as they want you to pay more taxes as it does they're willing to send your kids to die so they can wave the flag.